All right, and welcome, folks. Very excited to be here today chatting with the LoreCurator. We are going to be, continuing the Pride Talk series today. And so, myself, I'm Tai Wai. As I mentioned, a Arctic climate researcher by day and content creator by night. And I am also a spec, and a huge part of what I do, outside of school and content creation is create spaces like this for Ace and Arrow folks to come together and chat about many of the issues that we talk about on the podcast, and to give back to the communities that have been there for me in my journey. And it's through the work that I do that this podcast kind of, came to be. And the focus is looking at the lived experiences of asexuality and aromanticism through a lens of intersectionality, really trying to hammer home the point that the Ace and Arrow experiences are very diverse. And there is, no one way to be Ace or one way to be Arrow. And it looks all very different across the very diverse spectrums. And so we are here today to chat more about what Ace Pride looks like. We're going to be chatting about lots of other things, but without further ado, I'd love to introduce Lore to you. You want to say hi?
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know if I'm supposed to wait to say anything. Hi, I'm Lore. I'm known by way too many names in my life, so feel free to just call me Lore. My pronouns are they, them. I am a very new streamer. So while I work on my PhD, I also like stream art and co-working and games, and I just like to hang out and have a excuse to socialize on the internet. Yeah, I don't know what else to say.
Absolutely. That's all you need to say. So we've got the questions that we chatted about beforehand. Let me pull those up. So the first question kind of is around, how did you, come to, I guess, discovering your ASPEC identity? Often, ASPEC identities can be difficult to pinpoint, figuring out, my Ace and Arrow identities were quite difficult. I didn't come to realize them until I was, entering my 30s. And often this arises because it can be difficult to identify a lack of attraction without context or language to experience or to explain that. So how easy was it for you to realize your identity?
Oh, it was very easy at 13 to go, I'm bisexual, because my friend was also bi, and that made sense to me because I was like, I have to pick something. But no, it was not easy at all. I did not realize that I was asexual until near the end of my undergrad. Um, and given that I took what's called like a victory lap or whatever in high school, so 5 years instead of four, and 5 years of undergrad, um, there's a pattern here for schooling, but I did not really, it took me a long time. Like, I knew very early on as a kid that I was not straight. I knew that when I talked to, like, so I grew up in a household that was like mostly women, and I was raised to be a woman. Um, so hearing like my mom and my sister go like, "Oh, he's so hot" on on like somebody on TV or whatever, I was like, okay, I don't understand what this means. I think I'm missing something. And so I would always look at, you know, aesthetics from like a distant lens, I suppose. So I was like, oh, that must mean that I'm, just not super into men. But I do the same thing with women. I do the same thing with like any kind of like gendered body and like how people present themselves. I'd find them like pretty and like interesting to look at, but I would go like, I'm not really there. I don't get what it means to be attracted to this person. So I just kind of took a label that I had heard that seemed to match, and then I carried that with me as like, I don't know, a badge of honor, I guess. So it's like, yes, I'm not straight. And then constantly questioning myself and the validity of that label um, as I went forward until I was nearing the end of a very serious long term relationship and went, I think I'm asexual. And this was like 3 o'clock in the morning after an argument. So it was a very sudden realization, but it took quite a while to get there. Um, and a couple psychology courses along the way.
Absolutely. You are definitely not the first person, and you will not be the last person to mention the, you know, aesthetic attraction as what many folks in the ace community mistake sexual attraction as.
And as somebody who's an artist, like seeing people as aesthetically pleasing and as something that I want to draw or something I want to appreciate, I just thought that was what sexuality was for so long, like 2 decades of my life, probably. And I was like, yeah, I find all bodies attractive. So I'm bi because pan wasn't in my vocabulary at that point. And then when I learned about being pan, I was like, okay, well, maybe that fits, but I don't like the colors.
Mood.
Yeah. So I just carried along my with this label for so long because it was the only one that kind of made sense. And then I yeah. So I'm reading
BuzzFees.
BuzzFees. Yeah. But the attraction, like the sexual attraction never came. And like I started hanging around like more like stereotypical cis het men in my late undergrad, and they would talk about their attraction to women and stuff. Most of the time they were polite. Sometimes when there was the odd one together, it was not polite, and I had to very quickly shut that kind of conversation down. But it wasn't until that point that I really realized there was something that it wasn't necessarily that I was wrong, but I was misunderstanding my own like view of the world.
Absolutely. So very common. And the bi to possibly pan to ace pipeline is a very common one as well.
It's like this makes sense because I don't have any there's no magnetic attraction to anything. So I must be attracted to all. No, that's not in that way.
So you've kind of talked about, what were the clues and I guess points in your life that you started to say, hey, maybe something's a little different here,
Mhm.
that I'm not quite understanding. Were there any communities or resources that were helpful for you to figure out or come to the realization or to learn the language of asexuality?
I think I first definitely learned about asexuality, specifically like demisexual, in a developmental psychology course that I took because it was elective and I thought it'd be interesting. And I do want to put it out there, um, that the way this developmental psychology class was structured was incredibly different than a lot of psych courses I have heard about, especially in developmental psychology. Like, we talked about kink, we talked about fetish, we talked about like issues of shame leading to things like um, like self-harm and whatnot. And it was a very open class about these different things. And it was very informal, we'll say, because like the prof had his own experiences with shame and with, you know, seeking self-harm. And he was very cool about like just talking about a variety of different experiences in the world. So that was kind of like where I learned the language initially. I was like, wait, I can be something outside of these boxes that I was given. And the fact that I had like the language of bisexuality and such at 13 is mostly a credit to how open of a person my mom is, like how open-minded and how like she used to work in adult novelty stores out of necessity rather than choice, but it made her it exposed her to a variety of people, and so I knew some of her friends who were not straight and whatnot. So um that's where I kind of learned that I didn't have to be straight. But it wasn't until, you know, fourth year university course that I was like, oh wait, there's so much out there. And so I started Googling because the internet is a wonderful place. And back then we didn't have, Google AI giving us the wrong results. Um, but I found the asexuality visibility network. It's Aven, right? Like AVEN.
Yeah, Avon, exactly.
Yeah. I'm like, I don't know what the E stands for off the top of my head.
Education.
Okay. I thought it was something like that. Um, but I found it and I started thinking about it because and I do want to say that my conversation is going to go a little bit into relationship abuse and trauma. I will try to flag when that happens. So the thing that I am about to say is basically just related to relationship abuse when it comes to um, arguments about sexuality. So back in my undergrad, I was with a cishet man who was not as open-minded. It took him a lot of time to come around to the fact that I wasn't straight. And then early on in our relationship, I guess this is also crossing into some medical trauma. Um, I was diagnosed with Crohn's, and so there was like a little bit of like tension there because I wasn't desiring anything sexual, and that actually carried into like further into the relationship, um, past the medicalization of my body. Um, just because like I was busy with work, I was stressed, I was starting to lose that connection with him because he was demanding things from me, like expecting sex, expecting like the kind of attraction that I can't provide, like that kind of like being sexually attracted to somebody looks a certain way. And if I can't express that to him in the way that he wants, then that expectation is being kind of ignored. So it would cause a lot of arguments, like a lot of arguments. We would be up to 3, 4 a.m. just not yelling, I don't think we ever yelled, but it was just like aggravated, like back and forth conversations that went nowhere. And then, so I was like, well, maybe there's just something wrong with me, or maybe there's something that I'm missing. So I would like look up little things, but as soon as I learned the term asexuality, that's when I went to look up, like, what is that? What does that mean? And I was so relieved when I looked at Avid. I felt like I was, I would hide the fact that I was looking at this site. Um, excuse me. I would, use a private browser. I would close it as soon as he came into the room. Um, I felt like I was sneaking around doing something bad, but like as soon as I got enough understanding into my brain, I went, okay, this is probably what it is. And as somebody who has been out as various forms of not straight, um, I was ready to just kind of embrace it, but I wasn't ready to really tell him. And so it was probably unfair of me to bring it up suddenly in the midst of an argument. But I was kind of at my wit's end by that point because my goals and my commitment to school and higher education, these earplugs are not, I gotta bring them up. Hold on. The weight of them is like pulling them down and out of my ears. Anyway. Um yeah, it's just I was really committed to trying to get through undergrad and get caught up and move on to grad school and whatnot after dealing with illness. And he didn't really respect that. He thought I was neglecting him in a variety of ways. So I just kind of brought it up in the middle of an argument. I'm like, I think I'm asexual. And he went quiet for a while and then um like told me it was unnatural, and that was the end of the conversation. And that was when I decided that I couldn't stay.
No kidding.
Uh,
I'm so sorry.
it honestly, it led to me finding my spouse, X number of years later. So it's it was a shitty situation, but I think discovering that I was ace and revealing that and getting that kind of like resistance to accepting my identity and resistance to even like accepting that it could be a factor in our relationship um led me to make some really hard decisions that I was putting off for a long time. But I could not do that without like that slow, like finding all the pieces. And it shouldn't be a find all the pieces and then figure out your identity, right? Like I should have known as a 13-year-old that it was a possibility because the sex ed should be better than it is.
But it's not. It's terrible.
Yeah. Hmm.
Especially when you and I were in high school. It was absolutely, it was, they barely touched on 2S LGBTQIA plus identities, at all, let
I don't
alone
think I heard about it.
asexuality. Yeah, there was basically
Yeah.
nothing.
I don't think I heard anything from a teacher about being gay or not straight or anything aside from like whispers or like side comments.
Mm-hmm.
It all came from the schoolyard playground. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah.
should not be getting sex ed information from other kids.
No,
Oh,
absolutely not. The and unfortunately for me, the school that I was at, there was almost no visible queer representation. So it was almost impossible to figure out kind of my own identity until much later in life, unfortunately. Because I didn't know
yeah.
that my lack of caring for, relationships There was actually a term for it. I just thought, oh, I'm too shy or something. Because that's what society tells you,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
it is. Yeah, and I remember growing up in like growing up in Canada, but like around, I guess high school for me was mid to late 2000s, and then before that, elementary school. But I remember having a friend who I would say in hindsight was experiencing things like being, of asexuality and of being aromantic. And I remember trying to encourage them. And I feel bad about that now. We're still friends and I have apologized. But like I wanted to encourage them to, get out there and, find companionship. It was never about pushing them to do sexual acts. It was never about pushing them to do something they weren't ready to do. It was just me trying to say, "Oh, you'll find somebody eventually." It's just one of those things. So like that insidious like romanticism, like that like gets into your head from like movies and
Amatonormativity.
society. Yes,
Amatonormativity is the term. Absolutely. It's
and I feel terrible about that now, but we didn't have the language for it back then, and it's doesn't make it right, but I definitely was a perpetrator of that kind of normativity. Like, I am not going to be able to pronounce it right now because my brain is whatever. But yeah, it's unfortunate because we did not have the language at all, and even like knowing that people could be gay was this weird. The fact that I knew about it because other people in my elementary school were openly gay. And in my high school, we had a gay straight alliance, of which I was one of two members. The other one being my best friend, who was at the time a straight ally. uh, that didn't last long. She
no.
did not end up being straight. But yeah, if it wasn't for those little things, I don't think I would have learned, right? Until university when people actually started talking about it.
Absolutely. It really wasn't for me until university that I started to pick up on the language. We didn't have any GSA at my school that I was aware of. There was nothing.
I
Uh,
mean, I went to a pretty big high school, so and it had a pretty prominent musical theater department. So not having any kind of acknowledgement of gay students, I think, would have been a crime. You got
we were
2,000 students.
on the other hand, the school that I went to, we had a very small high school, so to speak, and I was the second graduating class of 30 from it. So that is partly why there was very little.
Yeah. I know I've talked to other ace friends and other queer friends more recently who have come from small towns and have gone to smaller high schools. And yeah, it's a completely different experience. Being outed at a small town high school sounds like a nightmare. Um, Meanwhile, I was just outing myself everywhere I went, which is itself like a privilege, I suppose. But it was just me preemptively anticipating, I guess, some pushback. But there's so many students in that school that nobody pushed back.
The wild part is it's not even like I grew up in a small town. I'm from, Metro Vancouver, but it's just that
Okay.
particular school was fairly new.
Was oh, okay.
And so we were the second graduating class that they had, so they didn't really
Oh,
have,
ever.
yeah, they didn't really have an
Oh,
established high school at that point. It was, the students kind of moved up the grades, and they kind of continued on. When I joined in grade 8, the first, like, the oldest students they had there were grade 9, and then I moved up, and the finally those students graduated, and then next it's us ready to graduate, a class of 30. So there wasn't much, in terms of representation at all.
Sorry, I'm laughing at Busby's. I'm just a really good
Real.
ally to moves to SMK.
Yeah, I was actually going to say something similar, but Busby said it much better than I could.
I think the I was never like a prominent like trans ally necessarily, but I remember in high school there was a moment I was walking to the bus stop and a person who was a masculine build, but quite slender, like and tall. I remember they were walking down the street in a very nice purple dress. And I absolutely loved seeing them in this dress. I thought they looked amazing. But then, the people around were harassing them as they walked past. And I was too scared at that point to say anything. But the fact that I was like, I want that as a goal, might have been a sign.
Real.
But it took a long time to get to the maybe I'm not a cis woman resolution. So
That all came much later for me as well. I've actually spoken to several folks who are, uh, I like to say beyond the binary as well. And for them, it was the sexuality to gender pipeline. And they kind of found that they came out as ace first, and then the floodgates opened, as they like to say.
Me too. As soon as I came out as ace, I was like, I wonder what else I'm wrong about. What else am I missing?
Yeah. Then I started to think, this idea of demigender, kind of something about it that speaks to me, but it can't be me because I'm 30. I should have figured this out a long time ago, but it kept coming back to it over and over and over again. And eventually I was like, you know what? There's something here that it's not demigender, but it's certainly not cis. And I finally came out last year as non-binary.
It takes a lot to get to that point. Especially I think for folks around our age, because of all the anti-trans like media messages that we got growing up. Even if they're not blatantly anti-trans, they're definitely transphobic. Like the haha, there's a man wearing a dress joke. Like, yeah. I can understand how it takes some people a long, long time. And also, we don't talk about non-binary as like an option. And it's not even like the only gender non-conforming option. It's an umbrella of options if you want to get super technical.
Absolutely.
But yeah, no, I came out as ace, left my then fiance. Yeah, we had gotten engaged at some point during that relationship. And then I want to say like a year or so after I started going, hey, can we use like a shortened version of my birth name and like maybe try on new pronouns with my friends? Like I came out as non-binary to them and they threw me a very gay themed party. Like there was Smarties ice cream, a rainbow chip cake, and I feel like there was some other things. Like they just basically grabbed as many rainbow things they could find. It was so sweet and so supportive. And then like I think like a year or two later, I was like, yeah, I actually want to be called Kale because I'm tired of people asking me what this shortened version of my legal name means. But it took until I was 31 to change my name. So I don't know, never too late.
Yeah,
And now I'm considering top surgery, right? So
yeah,
it's like it's a wild roller coaster.
absolutely. And I've signed up to be on the wait list for gender affirming care this year. So it's
It's
kind
so
of
good.
moving along and progressing, but it sure
Yeah,
took a long time. Absolutely.
it does.
Laughing at Busby's comment, not me cracking my friend's egg by telling them about how I felt about gender, but still being like, nah, I'm not trans, but going, hell yeah, you go, bestie, when they came out.
It's amazing. I feel like other trans people can kind of see it coming, but they're polite enough to not say anything.
I had
'Cause-
somebody, yeah, on that note, I had somebody at one of the groups at the organization that I work at saying I actually came out at one of the meetings and said, hey, you know, I'm going by they them pronouns now. And they said, oh, I just kind of assumed that already. And like 6 or 7 others told me that they had clocked me as NB long before I did.
We were just waiting. We just wanted you to say something. Yeah, like there were so many people in my life like called it. Like even some of my cis friends, they're like, yeah, we knew something was up like well before anything. I'm like, damn, I'm not good at hiding anything. I have no
No.
poker face.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Uh,
But I'm very lucky to have the supportive friends that I do. Like I absolutely love my support groups, like my support network of friends, um, who are unfortunately all over Ontario, which, you know, I'm kind of in the center of a lot of them though, so it's helpful, but it just means like, you know, like anywhere else in Canada, you want to go visit another city, you're driving for a couple hours.
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You get outside of Metro Vancouver and it's a long drive to the next city in British Columbia.
I've never been out west, but I've definitely
Yeah.
heard stories.
Yeah, it's like Vancouver and then nothing and then the Okanagan and then nothing. it's it's very different from Ontario for sure. At least southern Ontario. Northern Ontario is a whole
Yeah.
different ballgame.
Northern Ontario, you could do your best and probably never find like a settlement
Yeah, exactly. It's a
without
very
like a
different.
good map.
Yeah, it's a very different scenario up north.
I've taken us off track
No
as I often do.
worries. I'm always happy to get on these little tangents. It's all part of identity. So asexuality, you know, has been often called the invisible orientation, a phrase coined by Julia Sandra Decker in 2014, because of the fact that, you know, aspec identities experience all sorts of erasure. And as I like to say, how do you find an ace in the wild? It's not easy. It's not easy to find folks who are, you know, aspec. There's no contextual clues unless they're waving a big old ace flag or something. And then of
Which a lot
course,
of us
yeah,
don't do.
exactly. It's very understandably why, you know, it's also very understandably why we wouldn't.
Yeah. I mean, we make ourselves a target anytime we
Exactly.
do, because like you could be amongst a lot of queer folks.
Hmm.
Set out a garlic bread buffet. Yeah.
Real Busby. Real.
And we're all too happy to eat the garlic without caring about whether or not someone's gonna mind our breath later.
Exactly.
But I um sorry. Um yeah, when it comes to like, you could be in a group full of like queer and trans folks who still won't get like your experience or might not even accept your experience if you say, "Oh, I'm ace," or "Oh, I'm arrow." Like, it's so untalked about in a lot of ways. And I understand that like the 2S LGBTQ community is what I've often heard referred to as like a political identity rather than a like necessarily just sexuality or gender orientations and expressions. Like we're not bound together as a group because we all share the same sexuality or the same color of skin or the same like, you know other features that people will pick out to discriminate against folks. So the fact that nobody really talks about being ace, at least until more recently, and being arrow, like you go up and it's like, ah, I'm not interested in having sex with you, but like we can dance. Like it's weird. Like most people will just go, well, I'm looking for something with sexual like intimacy, which is fair, but it makes your dating pool smaller if you're ace but not arrow, and it also makes your socializing a little bit more constrained if you're aromantic and not looking to date but looking to meet friends in a new place. I
Exactly.
joined so at the start of my PhD, I was looking for friends in the city I had moved to for it, and I made a OkCupid profile, and you can set yourself to looking for friends because I wasn't ready to like really look for a relationship, but I kind of wanted to keep like things open. Um, I'm a very romantic person. I'm a very physically like affectionate person with partners and close friends. So I just kind of wanted to like meet people and see where it went. I had so many cishet guys ignoring the fact that one, I'm not a woman, and two, like I'm only really there for friends and I want to be friends before dating. To like they left me like creepy messages. Like one was like, "You have very nice lips." I'm like, you don't say that to somebody who doesn't know you. That's just creepy. But that is how I met my spouse. Within the first, 2 months of being in that city, I met my now spouse on that website. But they were the first person to acknowledge that I was non-binary and that, I was like my interests, rather than what I looked like. um, yeah, it's just I can just imagine how hard it would be to, from that experience, for me looking for friends on what is typically a dating app, but it does have the looking for friends option. I can only imagine how hard it would be to move to a new city far away from your friends like I did and try to make, you know, good connections with people, excuse me, with people without that romantic expectation. Because
Hmm.
I met up with somebody that I met on the on OkCupid, and I thought it was just like a meet, get some coffee, chat. He thought it was a date. I'm like, excuse I didn't realize he thought it was a date until it came to the end of the night, and he was like, I would really like to go on a second date with you. And I'm like, I don't feel that way. I could give you a hug if you want. We can be friends. Oh god. He ghosted me like 6 months later, but because he tried, I guess, to be friends and then wasn't interested. But yeah, it was as somebody who is demisexual and prioritizes my friendships, I can only imagine how difficult it is to find good friendships and good, like, close, relationships that are not romantic.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. And I
Yeah,
certainly
like
can
your queer
relate.
community.
Exactly. I
Yeah,
can certainly relate to moving to a new city because that's what I did, upending my whole life from, BC to move out here. And
yeah,
when I arrived, I knew nobody, and it took me a very long time to make connections. And it
yeah,
took me till, 2018, 2019 to really start making connections. And in many cases, I would say it was not until after the pandemic closures that I actually made the many of the connections I have now.
yeah. I was very lucky that my entire cohort in 2019, like, that's when I started my PhD program, there were out of the 7 of us, I can say for sure that half were some kind of queer for sure. And then the rest gets kind of like a, like there's no commitment to being straight or heterosexual or anything, or that's the same thing. Cishet, basically, is what I'm trying to say. Like, they were very open about not being confirmed one way or the other, but saying, it doesn't matter because I'm married, or it doesn't matter because I'm not looking for a relationship right now, and stuff like that. So that is a weird, like, position to be in, where your entire cohort is like comprised of queer or queer adjacent people who are also neurodivergent. Like,
Yeah,
when does that happen?
yeah, absolutely.
So I was very lucky. I made friends. Unfortunately, because of COVID, um, some of them had to move away. Like, a couple of friends moved back out west if they were originally from there, or moved out west to be with their spouse because my one friend got a job out there, or my one friend's husband got a job teaching at um, University of Alberta. So she moved out there because they had a kid together. Um, and then those who stayed dropped out because it was so hard not to have connections and stuff. I'm like the only person who, one, didn't drop out, and two, hasn't defended yet of my cohort left, which is lonely, but that's okay.
I can relate there. In year 8, am the only one that I know of in my cohort still around. The wildest thing is there's somebody in one of the adjacent labs to me that did a master's, left, worked in industry for 4 years, and now is back doing their PhD. And here I am still trying to finish.
Yeah, it's the workflow is so weird and random, and it doesn't matter how good of a situation you have it initially, the PhD will inevitably ruin that.
Oh, will it ever? It will. It will do all sorts of things to your mental health, and then you add in things like slipping on ice and getting a concussion and having to take a year off from that, and
Yeah.
it just really complicates things, unfortunately. And I won't go into. I'll be talking about mental health much more on Friday when I do the mental health raid train, but certainly mental health has been a big reason why it's taken me so long to finish. Absolutely.
Same here. And I just like, on the topic of asexuality and aromanticism, though. Like, I think it can be very lonely when people place these expectations on you. Like, you meet a new friend and they're interested in you sexually, and you have to be like, or romantically, and you have to be like, I'm not there yet. I'm not interested. And it's tough when you're already in a relationship. Like going back to what I was saying about, the toxic one I was in my undergrad, um, realizing that you're asexual and you're not, and arguably I am somewhere in the gray ace spectrum,
Yeah.
and I usually default to demisexual because I don't really experience sexual attraction, but I feel physically more willing and closer with people. The longer I know them and the stronger the emotion I have or like with them or connection to them. And I had lost that with my partner at the time. Um, and having to say, I'm not sexually attracted to you, and two, I don't think I ever will be. But especially not right now because I'm feeling like we're losing this bond. Like that's incredibly, I don't know, if I was on the other end of that, I would be hurt. So I don't blame him for the kind of like overreaction necessarily. Okay, he's responsible for those emotions and how he reacts. But I can understand why he did what he did and what he said, like why he said what he said, because it's hurtful, hearing like that a partner that you were interested in marrying is no longer attracted to you because you previously had this expectation that they were. Um, and it can make, I know as an ace person, like those outward expectations that get placed on you really make you feel like something's wrong with you. Um, but it's those expectations that are misplaced, right? Um, and it can just be very isolating because you don't want to lead people on, as they will inevitably say that you've done. Um, but you also don't want to hide parts of yourself. So I was always very open, between my ex and my spouse. I did date somebody kind of like as a rebound just to kind of figure out where I was. But I was very open about my sexuality. I was very open about what I wanted out of life and everything else. And at that point forward, you know, I made sure that that was a rule of mine. Like in my introduction to anybody that I was interested in dating or becoming friends with, I would lay down that kind of ground rule, which is like, this is where I'm at, and I don't want those kinds of expectations. Um, and with my spouse, we have a very open, um, kind of openly communicative relationship. And we touch base every so often, and we talk about like the what ifs and you know, the potential hiccups that will come up. And right from the get go, I was like, I am not opposed to non monogamy if that is something you need in order to be happy in this relationship and and feel fulfilled. Like if I can't provide the sexual side of your needs, I am happy for you to, you know, seek it elsewhere. Um if that is what needs to happen. So long as we're always in communication and we're being safe about things and we're being, you know, honest and faithful in the ways that we deem to be faithfulness, and not a lot of people are open to that, and not a lot of people are interested in sharing. So they go, well, I don't want to date an asexual person because they're not going to want sex as much as me, or they're not going to be sexually attracted to me, and I'm not going to see that kind of like desire reflected back at me. Um, and yeah, it's very frustrating to navigate. But finding somebody who is willing to be open and to listen and to kind of like negotiate relationship boundaries from the get go is amazing. Um, and my spouse is not asexual. They are bisexual, but they respect my boundaries. They respect my somewhat wavering interest, I guess, in that kind of relationship and that kind of like intimacy. Because it is very much based on my emotions, and how I'm feeling, if I'm even up to it. Um, and most of the time, it's not a priority of mine, so I will prioritize other things because I don't experience that sexual attraction.
That is
Um,
so understandable. Absolutely.
but I know not everybody's like that. Like I know some people who are allosexual want a partner who's allosexual because they want the expectations they have for their partner and the relationship to be met. And I am not the kind of person that puts expectations on other people in the same way, I think. And so I'm very open to I think you were talking a while ago, I was listening to your stream, you were talking about relationship anarchy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very open to different kinds of relationships and different kind of dynamics in ways that I think people aren't even thinking about, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, relationship anarchy is kind of a relationship philosophy that, encompasses, anti-hierarchical structure. But one of the biggest things is just don't use societal norms to dictate what your relationship should look like. Decide
Mhm.
amongst yourselves what you want that relationship to be. I think
Yeah,
that's, very reasonable. And, ideally how relationships should be curated. But
honestly. Yeah. I remember we got married last October or this past October, and I remember working on my vows since the day after we got engaged because I wanted them to be reflective of my feelings through the engagement, but also just like of our relationship as a whole. And we both ended up, we did not collaborate, but we both ended up talking about like our own sense of autonomy and sovereignty and like having our own sense of self and being together as a journey, but not as a like we're not chained together. It's not a forced thing. And it's very I found like I feel like sexuality in general and like romantic relationships in general should come together in those ways. It should always be about the rules that you are setting with the people in your life together. It's a
hmm
negotiation.
exactly. It's all about communicating with each other what you are comfortable with, what you want the
Yeah.
boundaries of a relationship to be. Exactly. So we are coming up to the 1 hour mark here, which is when the ads will kick in. So do you want to take a short break and stretch for the next couple
Yeah,
minutes? I think I
that'd
can
be good.
definitely do it. So then we'll come back and chat a little bit about, the frustrating world of misconceptions. So I'll
I like how
see
we
you.
haven't even got to question 4.
Hey, it's been a really, really great chat. So I'm not worried
I've
at all.
enjoyed it.
So we'll be back in a few minutes. See you on the other side. All right, welcome back, folks. Thanks for sticking around through the ads. So we chatted about, discovering, asexuality and our identity. We chatted about, why is asexuality so invisible and what are the challenges that invisibility creates. And now we want to kind of extend that a little bit and talk about what are some of the most frustrating misconceptions that you've come across in regards to asexuality.
Do you want me to start? Is that my cue?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was getting the chat back up so I could see it. Misconceptions. Okay, so I have had conversations with both like allosexual people as well as like other ace folks and have experienced some like either misunderstandings on both parts or like just a little bit of pushback. Like from ace folks, sometimes they go, well, like you're not sex repulsed and you do experience some kind of desire, like in a lane that is similar to sexual attraction. So are you really ace? And I'm like, well, my default is zero sexual attraction, zero desire for like other people's bodies in that way. I would much rather just ask them to pose for me so I can draw them. And then with, you know, I don't know. I feel like with allosexual people, it's just a lack of comprehension of like what that experience is like. Because I've talked about doing things like life drawing, and drawing like nude models and stuff before, and allosexual people will be like, "How do you concentrate? How do you just look at the naked body?" I'm like, because I'm stressed out trying to get this assignment done. Like what? Like it's just a body.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, sorry, if you've seen like all boobs, all genitalia, they're all different, sure. But if you've seen one, it's got to be really, really, really different, like a whole nother like biological makeup, you know? Like it has to be non-human at that point for me to go, that's interesting. Beyond like the like, oh, this person is a little bit curvier, that's kind of cool, or oh, I've never drawn like this kind of like angular bone structure before. Like that's where the interest comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And people I feel don't understand how you can look at people's naked bodies as not sexual. And so the biggest misconception is that, you know, bodies are inherently sexual because they're not.
No.
You have to sexualize them in order for them to be sexual.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, we have a culture in which bodies are sexualized to the extent that like you can't escape thinking of bodies in sexual ways, or unless you are, you know, ace and in my case also autistic. Like
No. Yeah.
like you've never looked at a naked body and been like attracted to it? No. Now I've looked at a naked body and been like, how the hell am I going to like shade this? Like, why is the lighting so weird? Like, and people don't get it. They think I'm weird for that. And I'm like, I'm not weird. You're the weird one. Looking at bodies the way you do all the time.
Mode.
And it's not wrong to be sexually attracted to people,
Mm-hmm.
but even people who aren't ace, who are artists, go, yeah, when you get into that like art headspace, you're not looking at the body as a body. It's just another object.
Mm-hmm.
It's just another thing to draw.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you've distanced yourself from it. And I feel like in some ways, asexuality is very much the same. There's like a little bit of a distance
Mm-hmm.
between what society expects you to see in other people's bodies. And so you're able to kind of like reevaluate your position, I guess, with respect to other people's bodies and sexualities and desires. And so I know, but then I also get the, well, you're ace, like why are you occasionally having, you know, before I was like committed, I did have like a thing with a married couple, I guess, but I had dated one of them years prior, and that was the only reason why I accepted their invite. And it was less like sexual, more like just like fun,
Mm-hmm.
like physical intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't see it as like anything significant at that point. And just because like I am ace doesn't mean that I don't have a libido. It doesn't mean that I don't have certain desires. I just don't have that kind of like, I need a lot more work to get into the headspace that
Hmm.
people can somehow just jump into. And a
So
lot
yeah,
more trust and negotiation.
exactly. And it's very unfortunate that folks hear ace and immediately think, oh, they must be sex repulsed, sex negative, and never even, don't have any libido of any sort at all. And that's not the case
And
for
that you can't
most
make
aces.
sexual jokes around us.
Exactly.
Most ace people I know make more sexual innuendos than allosexual sometimes.
So
Because there
many
is that
people.
distance,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
You can do the deadpan because it means nothing to you. There's no like embarrassment there because it's not something for you to be embarrassed about. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing that things like asexuality and more broadly like some neurodivergence like experiences bring is like this ability to not it's not that I don't feel embarrassment, but I don't think to be embarrassed unless I've been made to feel embarrassed and ashamed by people outside of myself in the past, you know? So I'm comfortable like if I were to um I don't know, I guess I could probably seek it out, but like if I wanted to, I could be a nude model for a life drawing class because I don't see my body as like shameful or as embarrassing or as sexual and like I don't think looking at another person's naked body is inherently like a private thing. It's private in the sense that it's controlled, like the person needs to be consenting. But there's I'll put it this way. I'm a lot of cues will go over my head, but the biggest cue that ever went over my head in high school, there was a woman, well, I guess a teenager, another teenager, girl who was very openly gay, at least bi, but I think at that point she had sworn off men because teenage boys are not, you know, they're really not fun. Uh, relationships with them were more painful than beneficial, I think. But yeah, she invited me over for a sleepover, and then she went and took a shower, and I was like watching the show she put on, and then she came out and she was just like walking around naked, and I just was like, okay, she's gonna dry off and get clothes on, and we're gonna go to bed. We're just gonna chill, whatever. Apparently, that was an invitation. Because I was talking to a friend about it like the other day, like, oh yeah, this is how it happened. I'm like, how did you just not like? Why did nothing happen? She was naked. It's like, yeah, she was naked. She came out of the shower. You have to be naked to have a proper shower.
No.
So I feel like people, you know, will just think like, oh, we're sex repulsed or we have no like we're some people think maybe that we're childish because we don't have this kind of adult sense of, you know, bodies. But I'm like, I think we just have a different way of looking at the world and being with others, just like any other sexuality. And not every asexual's like disposition towards other people is going to be the same, obviously. Um, like there are folks who are sex repulsed. There are folks who have no desire, who aren't necessarily sex repulsed in the way that like the thought makes them grossed out, but they have no desire to interact with other people, but they're happy to like, you know, look at porn or be like participants in kink. Because kink is not necessarily sex, right?
Absolutely
So
not.
there's so many different ways of seeing and being in the world. And everyone just thinks, oh, asexuals are like this. And it's like, No, we're just as varied as anybody else. And like I personally, like I do identify as ace because I don't have sexual attraction and because I can create, or my default is this kind of distance from sexuality in this in like in an allosexual way. Um but I think physical intimacy, like through sex and through cuddling and through, just skin to skin contact, is incredibly important to me and to people I'm with. The sex is less important, but like that feeling of being with people I care about in a way that I know makes them happy, that I can provide, is the draw there, right? And I know not everybody is that way, but I also, for me, I need to have the right conditions in order to be that kind of, like, in that kind of vulnerable space, and to be interested at all. Um, and so it all goes back to communication and negotiation, and like setting up your boundaries and your expectations in a very open and clear way. And I feel like being ace and acknowledging that I was ace, and being aware of what that means for me was like the biggest step that I needed to get to a point where I was like not only open to advocating for myself, but able to do so, and being like certain in my need to do so. I would never have been able to, you know, have these kind of open conversations with my spouse had I not realized that I was asexual, and had I not accepted the fact that I don't need to prioritize sex the same way that my partner does, and that I don't need to provide that kind of like sexual service that is expected of me from some partners I've had in the past. And I know like a roadblock that I had to, like, circling back to one of the earlier questions, a roadblock I had to understanding that part of myself, and also um more recently to accepting that I want top surgery, um is the fact that like when you grow up being raised to be a girl and to be a woman, your your worth is kind of tied to your desirability, and there are certain expectations that are kind of like worked into how you're raised and like how you try to find your way in the world. Like, putting aside trauma that made my like abandonment issues a thing, we'll put that aside. That is relevant, but we're putting it aside. um just being raised to be a woman in this world where your worth is so dependent on what you look like and who wants you physically, not just emotionally, makes you do things that you don't really actually want. And it's been more recent that I've kind of reevaluated some of my stances. Like, I remember being significantly smaller than I am now, back at the early high school, and thinking, oh, I want like bigger breasts because somebody will want me better or whatever. I'll be more attractive to others or whatever. And also being in positions and relationships where I would engage in sex and I would like try to be more sexual than I felt, or that I desired to be, just because I thought it would make me desirable to others, and would get them to stay and to want to be like associated with me. Um, and that's really toxic. It's not good. And it's so, it makes you go, well, I was like this in high school, so how am I ace now? Or I wanted bigger breasts at this point. Why do I want them gone now? It's because what I wanted back then was to be desired and to be cared about. And this is how I was kind of raised, like, not directly, but the society around me convinced me that was the way to do it.
Absolutely.
Um, and so, realizing that I was ace was a very freeing moment where it's like, huh, I don't have to do these things if I don't want to. And it made my relationship to sex a lot different. And it became something that, like, even if it's not a priority of mine, it became more of something I could enjoy, for myself, if I so choose. Um, which is a very different stance than I had previously.
Absolutely. And you're not the first person to say that. And I can certainly say that, I felt pressured by society that, oh, I must look for relationships. I must be in a relationship or, I'm a
Mhm,
failure. And so I tried it. I was in a relationship.
mhm.
Didn't work out. I was just kind of doing these things robotically because I felt like that's what I was supposed to do. And it obviously didn't work out. And retrospectively looking back, all of it started to make so much more sense. And coming to that realization, hey, I'm ace spec, I'm ace, some flavor of gray ace, and
Yeah.
I'm definitely arrow. It's been so incredibly freeing for me, realizing I don't have to try to conform to what society tells me I should be. And, I think it's also certainly played into on the opposite, being socialized as male, being the one that's supposed to be the person driving the
Yeah.
the sex, the relationship, the whatever. It's been
Mhm.
so much more freeing being like, nope, don't have to do that, don't want to deal with it, and it's
Yeah.
just been so much better as a result.
Yeah, the way we were socialized as, you know, excuse me, kids, but also teenagers and then young adults is so it can put so much pressure on you to be who you're not, especially when we don't have these options of being different, you know? You can't be sold, like, skincare routines or, like, extreme routines. Like, I do skincare because I care about myself. But, like, the extreme ends of these things, like fad diets, plastic surgery for some people where it's really not necessary, like the feeling the need to do these minute changes just because you want to do a certain like, to look a certain way or perform a certain role. And, like, you can look at actors whose weights fluctuate wildly, especially the male actors, where they have to go, you know, from a very healthy weight and body for them to extremely, like, toned and, like, in that case, it's usually dehydrated, right, to make the muscles pop. Um, and there's all these, like, expectations that are placed on us, and I think it can really skew how we understand ourselves and who we want to be or who we think we wanna be. And then, you add in a lot of our cases, like, neurodivergency to it, and it's like you are just trying to figure out what's going on and what you're not understanding so you could fix whatever it is that you need to fix to be, you know, better like fitting in the world, or to fit better in the world. And like there is nothing you can do to fit better in the world in a way that it won't hurt you in the end.
So, so, so true. Exactly.
Um, and I don't know, I feel like realizing I'm ace, realizing I'm trans, and, just becoming more open about those things and clearing up, misconceptions. Like, my spouse had a lot of questions when we first got together, but they were all from a place of wanting to understand, and I was happy to answer those questions because, for the first time, somebody wasn't just, like, assuming that there was something wrong with me or that I was weird. It was like a genuine, I don't feel this way, but I want to know how it feels for you because I want to know what that experience is like so that I understand what your boundaries are. And it's, yeah, being open and being more myself has led me to be much more involved in my community, much more involved with my friends. I feel like I'm actually getting a little emotional here, but I feel like a much stronger person than I was back when all this stuff was happening when I was first coming out at the end of my undergrad and my early in my master's. I was like so lost and frustrated with not fitting and not being what other people expected me to be. And I still struggle with those expectations for different reasons. But I don't know. I feel like being ace and accepting that that is how I, it's one of the lenses with which I view the world and I interact with the world has made me realize I was trans. And then from there, realize that there's ways of being in the world that I don't like, that I can make opportunities out of that are more me. And aren't gonna, emotionally scar me for doing and make me want to not be here. And that's like the biggest thing is like for the first time in more than half my life, the last few years, I've actually wanted to be here. And that's like huge. Um, because I know some people struggle with not wanting to be here. And I do want to put like a voice to that because, denying your sexuality, denying your gender, or not being and not having resources with which to understand it can make you feel like you don't belong here, or that you're wrong in some way. And I want people to understand that maybe it's just how they're looking at things and how people are looking at them, and they just need to kind of see where those feelings are coming from.
Absolutely. So, so, so true on so many levels. We obviously try to see ourselves through the lens of societal norms. And if we don't, fit those societal norms and say, hey, who am I? Why am I not fitting in? It's going to lead to a lot of pain. It's going to lead to a
Hmm.
lot of confusion and isolation. And that certainly did for me. And finally coming to realize this and
Hmm.
finding that community that I didn't know I was looking for, that I didn't know existed. I'm so much
Yeah.
happier now. And I feel like I have the energy to be able to give back to the community that was so welcoming to me and so important for me the last 5, 6, 7 years.
Hmm. Yeah. And I also think that within the last 6 months, I really started like connecting with my local queer community. Not just ace folks, but like trans and allosexual folks too that don't necessarily fit within this cishet like world. Um, and connecting with them first last summer, I started singing in an all queer choir. So starting there, doing something I was missing because I used to sing um late elementary school and then through most of high school I would sing as part of like very like either okay, so late elementary school I was part of a group that would go to retirement homes and we'd sing like songs from the 50s and 60s to like the residents there. And then in high school I knew I really liked to sing and I liked to sing for others and with others. So I joined the high school choir. Um, and I did drop out of choir a couple years in because I just felt really lost because of things going on in my life at the point. And a few years after, when things started kind of settling down a little bit, I really started missing singing as part of a choir. But it wasn't until like, oh, geez, like half a decade or so later that I was like, oh, I really should look into like singing again. And then the pandemic hit. And then yeah, so it wasn't until last summer that I went in and I said like I applied to be part of this choir. There was no audition. It was just like prove that you're a real person. But yeah, I joined and started singing with them, and it was amazing. It made me feel so connected. There is something about singing with other queer folks that, and like, I guess this probably goes with any kind of like community activity. But when you're joining your voice with others who are different in their own ways, but are coming together as a collective sound, I don't know. It's just there's something about that moment and singing together and being together in community and in harmony that makes you feel so connected to the other people in the choir and as part of that community. And that made me go, okay, I really like this. I like people, actually. Maybe I should go see more people. um,
That's all I could think of when you said that was those really frustrating, CAPTCHA puzzles that I just want to punch every time.
oh no, it was nothing like that. It was like a Google form where you're just like, this is your name, this is your pronouns,
Yeah,
stuff like that, like a way to
absolutely.
contact you
Yeah, done those many times for sure.
and like why you're interested. And they're like, yeah, that's fine. Um, but and it's like a safety thing, right? Like making sure you're not just trying to worm your way in to figure out what the gay agenda is. But yeah, and then I started volunteering with another like I was a local queer organization um who recently got a space in downtown of the city and are a registered charity and everything. So like I've been really putting a lot of time into being a part of that. I spent weeks putting together a like database, like a pantry database of all the food items that we had, just to keep track of like expiration dates. I was mostly doing it on my own though, so it took a while.
I can imagine.
Uh,
Wow.
but like doing those things and like interacting with people there, and from there, like I started working on other community projects. Like I'm working on a pitch with a couple groups, like two different pitches on two different projects, but for the same like potential funding opportunity where we're trying to get funding to implement. In the one group, it's a workbook for parents and adults and guardians and such who have teens who are struggling with substance use. Um, Basically, it's centering the teen's well-being rather than the parent, because a lot of them that are out there right now are like trying to show sympathy and empathy for the parent and like center their feelings. We would rather we're pushing like a workbook where they can sit down and work through those complicated feelings without putting that on the teen and without really like what's the word, letting themselves wallow in it. And the goal is basically just to make them more empathetic for what the teen is going through and be a better support person without expecting the youth to completely give up substance use and without pushing them away, without being like, well, respect your elders, just listen to me, stuff like that. And then the other project is um a comprehensive like physical map that can be folded up and put into someone's pocket, or their own pocket. We're not going around tucking it in, but of just like all the different mental health, addiction, and housing resources in the area, so that folks who don't have reliable phone access and internet access can know where to go. um So I've been working in both these groups as well, and it's less of a queer focus thing. But if I hadn't been like connecting with my local queer community, I would never have thought about like going forward. Like it was a trans woman who suggested that I go to the initial conference that was talking about like the potential like grant opportunity and funding opportunity. And she invited me to work on one of the projects with her. So like, if it wasn't for interacting with my queer community, I would not be doing this for the other vulnerable people in my city. And like, I guess disclaimer for substance use, but my brother struggled with substance use for pretty much my entire life. We were 12 years apart. He unfortunately passed at the beginning of my master's because of complicated factors. Like, it's not really confirmed one way or another if it was, you know, substance poisoning or not. Sorry, my cat is trying to eat plastic. Go away, it's not dinner time. um, but it's yeah, it's just dealing with that. I feel like connecting with with people who are closer to my own experience allowed me to broaden my social scope and start seeing ways in which I can use, my own experiences with family members with substance use problems and their struggles to kind of like direct where I can provide help. Because I'm a very big proponent of lived experience being something that needs to be drawn on more in various like institutional um, like resources and programs and stuff. So even though I don't have that firsthand experience, I am really happy to provide what I have experienced and what I've seen my brother go through as like kind of a credibility boost to others doing the work. And so I'm happy to, lend my expertise in other areas to help these kind of projects along. But again, I had to understand my identity better in order to accept myself, and to feel confident enough to connect with other people within my within the immediate queer community. And then I had to go and connect with them and to experience that kind of that feeling of belonging and that feeling of being part of something that is bigger than yourself, and like a network of folks who are going to come from different backgrounds and experiences. And then from there I could broaden to other opportunities. And doing all these community things has led me to be more committed to my dissertation than I have been in like 2 years, maybe more.
Absolutely can relate on that. I was going through severe burnout for a while on the dissertation on my end, and then getting involved with, organizations here, becoming the one of the peer support co-facilitators for the Ace and Arrow group that I run. Gives me the energy, gives me that ability to go do the PhD that I didn't have 2-3 years ago. So I can certainly appreciate, how these other things, in our lives can bring us the energy that the PhD is just there to deplete, unfortunately.
Yeah, not to say much about like the university, but it sure seems like that's what they're out to do. Like, let's
Unfortunately.
use the energy of our grad students to fuel our own self-entitlement
Mm-hmm.
and other
Absolutely.
nefarious deeds.
Exactly.
But remember, both sides need to be listened. Okay, I'm not getting into that. I will I will hold off. That's a whole nother conversation.
Yep.
um I'm looking at the questions because there is a couple I think I wanted to get to, but
Absolutely. We don't have to cover everything at all by any means. Pick
yeah.
which ones you want
I
to cover.
mean, I'm working from the last question back just to make sure that I don't ignore anything. A/Arrow Pride. I mean, I've talked about it. Like, I needed that kind of sense of who I was, who I wanted to be, and what I wanted to be in the world in order to move forward. And I still have a weird relationship with like self-pride and being proud of myself. I don't quite understand what pride means in that kind of sense. But I think affirming myself as who I want to be and as who I am and how I experience the world, at least right now in this moment, there is room for sexuality to be fluid, but like the way I experience the world in that way or through a sexuality lens has not really changed so far in my life. So we'll see. Um, but yeah, like affirming that has let me be more confident in other areas of my life. So it's been enormous. Um, we've already talked about relationships. Da, da. I'm going to talk about media representation because that was the one I wanted to get to, I think, the most.
Absolutely.
Because in case it was not clear, uh, I like stories. I I chose the name on Twitch LoreCurator because I love stories, because I grew up with books. Books were my only friends at certain points in my life. And like it's so humans ultimately need stories and need to tell each other stories. And those stories don't necessarily have to be fictitious. You know, there's always a narrative when you tell like a chain of events. There's always a narrative when you're writing a dissertation. Um, as my supervisor often tells me, find the narrative structure in your argument. Yeah. But I think humans are always fascinated by stories, both fictitious and not. Um, we like to tell them, we like to be part of them, we like to explore their themes. I got into so when I started university, I started in English literature and creative writing because I wanted to be a high school English teacher on the side and a writer more predominantly. Um, that did not pan out because I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, and unfortunately, teachers are not one, well paid, two, well respected, and three, at the time, I think they had removed the ability of your sick days to add up and roll over from year to year. And I was like, well, I've got this chronic illness that some will present itself in the future when I least expect it, probably. I've been in remission for over 12 years at this point. I think it'll be 12 years this summer, which is huge. I'm very lucky, but not everybody is that lucky. And just because I'm in remission doesn't mean it won't come back. So like the symptoms, like Crohn's is still there. Like it doesn't go away. It's just it's like any kind of chronic illness. It goes into remission, kind of stays dormant, and then it comes back. But I would need those sick days as a teacher because a flare up could be, a couple days, couple weeks, couple months, could be a couple years. And you need the kind of time to figure out how to solve the symptoms, like how to deal with the symptoms. And if I didn't have built up sick days, well then I would be screwed. Like if we're only, given like 6 or so sick days in a semester or a year or whatever, you can eat those up with just doctor's appointments throughout the year. Like I see my specialist almost every year, like twice a year. And yeah, they're really short appointments. Like I talk to him for maybe 5 minutes, but I'm stuck in the waiting room for an hour prior, and then in his like little, the patient room for like 20 minutes at least. That's my whole day. you know.
Exactly.
So I kind of gave up on that, but I didn't give up on being a writer. And then the philosophy bug bit me again because I did do philosophy in high school and I loved it because it let me ask questions. Everybody was too annoyed with me to let me ask anymore. My family quickly became bored of my, well, why is this the case?
I can relate on that.
For context, most of my family either did not finish high school or finished it late or finished it and then didn't go on to university in the case of my sister. Um, so having a very curious, non-binary, uh, autistic child that was not really aware of it, and nobody was aware until I brought it up years later, um, asking all these questions about why things are the way they are in the world and giving random fact tidbits every so often when you're like, hey, mom, I learned this thing on the Discovery Channel today. And then using that factoid as like a conversation starter for like the rest of the year. Yeah, you kind of
Yes,
get frustrated.
so many things I can relate on there. So many things. The parallels are
Oh.
just wild. I would absolutely just cause my parents great stress and frustration, asking why this, why that, and just, bringing up random facts and them pretending to care, and absolutely can
Yeah.
relate on that one.
And then, basically coming to the conclusion that your family members are not going to listen to you, so you cannot ask them questions anymore. And then getting to a high school philosophy course where you're encouraged to ask questions and to like poke little holes in people's answers and find more information. I loved that. I absolutely loved that. I failed the course the first time I took it because I didn't do any of the work. So I took it again to like raise my grade, but I loved it. So I took a lot of first year philosophy courses in university, and I ended up becoming a double major in my second year at the end of my second year because I was like, I want to take more courses, but I kind of don't want to until I confirm that I'm either minoring or majoring. And the academic advisor for the department, who I was talking to about the potential of being a double major, was like, you need to stop taking first year courses. Like, if you want to do anything in terms of like a minor or major or whatever with this, you just got to take more higher level courses. I'm like, okay. So, um, I did so and I really enjoyed it. And then, came grad school. So then at that point, I was thinking, well, maybe I'll be a university professor. Um, which, spoiler alert, did not happen, is not happening. No interest anymore. But the thing that followed me throughout is trying to balance my desire to know, right? And my drive to learn, my drive to collect information, my drive to collect stories and things about the world with my need to create and to be some kind of writer or artist or creator. And it's always been this kind of like balancing act for me. And part of that was because I didn't see, like, even when I was a kid, I understood that like there were things in media that I appreciated and that I enjoyed, but I did not necessarily connect to as strongly as others seem to. I've never been part of fandoms. Not because I haven't been fan of things or that I haven't enjoyed certain stories or that I don't have books that I've read and reread to the point where they are falling apart because they are well loved. But it was difficult for me to find like characters that I could latch onto the way others could. I don't, and which is why I wanted to talk about this because I don't really see a lot of ace representation that is done in the way that I can connect to. And I'm not saying that it needs to because, there's a variety of ways of being ace. And so instead of going, well, why don't they write about my life or whatever the cishet guys talk about? I go, I'm just gonna make it myself. I didn't see characters that I identified with like visually, so I started drawing. I didn't see stories that I could connect with at that time, so I started writing like various stories in high school um, that never really went anywhere. But all that practice and that like continuous like building of like stories and not really finishing them, or of stories and like kind of letting them trail off, led me to this like desire to continue to create stories. And so in terms of like what is my favorite representation in mainstream media, I don't have one. I don't really engage with mainstream media as much as other people do, but I love certain characters. I love like The Good Place was amazing because there's so many different like personality traits that I see in their characters in that show that I very much identify with. But it's still not like ace representation in a lot of ways. Um, because there's no ace characters there. It's just various quirky people trying to find a way to be good. Um, so I actually have a project that I'm currently working on, which is about it's semi-autobiographical, and it's one that I started developing ideas for as far back as probably my undergrad. Um, just about being ace and being non-binary and navigating relationships. And I'm using a lot of my own personal experiences to kind of inform the narrative. And it's very much a back and forth between my experiences with toxic relationships versus my experiences with healthy and more affirming relationships through like a fictitious lens. Like I'm not using people's names. I'm not even using really like who they were. It's more of the inspiration from the situations that I had been in, and using that kind of to show how both how like relationships don't necessarily have to be romantic to be significant, and to bring parts of yourself out, but also how navigating your identity and navigating the world that you want to be a part of, and like different aspects of yourself to be represented in it, how like a toxic relationship can really hinder that progress, but at the same time it can, realizing that it is toxic kind of hints at where you need to go from there and where you need to kind of explore. And so the thing that frustrates me about people who are like, I don't see this represented, and I'm mad about it in the like very like petty way where they're like, I need to be represented and I'm tired of seeing marginalized groups in the case of like cishet white men. It's just like you could go create it, or you can talk about it in a way that's like, hey, what would good representation look like? Hey, how can we be constructive about this and make room for others at the table? Um, I don't know. I'm very much the if you don't like it, you can go do it yourself. That said, when it comes to queer and like marginalized identities in general, doing that yourself is a struggle. Crowdfunding is important. Connecting, networking. I'm not good at that. So I understand the need for that, but like, I don't know. I'm rambling. My point is more that I know nobody's going to do my story justice. And so I kind of initiate it myself, and I just kind of do what I think is needed. And even if it gets read by nobody outside of my friend circle, I've still told my story. I don't know. It's a
That's
weird relationship I have to stories.
that's so important, and I absolutely love this perspective you've brought because it's such a different and refreshing and important perspective to have, because absolutely, mainstream media is never going to be able to tell your story. It's never going to be able to adequately represent all ace perspectives. And that's why we
Yeah.
need this indie, you know, small, small publisher, single person publishing perspective and writing to tell the stories. Because that's the real experience.
I also think like this is a bit contentious because a lot of people who write or who view writing as a kind of like acting and putting yourself in other people's shoes and stuff, they're not wrong. I will say this much. You can write diverse characters into your stories. But the thing that is contentious that I think a lot of folks don't want to acknowledge or are resistant to when I say a marginalized person should always be the one to write what it is to be that specific intersectional identity. Because I can't write like I'm not racialized. I am very clearly white. I am very pale on this camera. I am, I have disabilities. I am ace. I am queer. I am trans. But I cannot write what it is to be a Black lesbian woman in whatever big city. Like, that is not my story to tell. And I don't think we need to tell those stories as, like, in my case, as a white person, I don't need to tell the story of what it is to be that identity because I don't know that identity. I can write like a Black person into my story and I can talk about struggles of racism and I can show what those struggles end up looking like from whatever perspective I'm doing, but it will not do that story justice. And I should not cross the line into being like, I know exactly what this means. And so I'm going to write the story as if I was this person. I feel like that's taking up space that could have been given to somebody who otherwise would not be listened to, you know?
Absolutely. So, so true.
So like I'm a big proponent, like your characters don't all have to be white. Your characters don't all have to be straight.
No.
Or even all gay. Though honestly, it makes more sense for them all to be gay because if you're queer, neurodivergent, and you look at your group of friends, chances are most of them are queer and
Yep.
neurodivergent as well.
Absolutely. So true.
But yeah. But yeah, don't take up space that's not yours to take up, but also create stories and indulge in stories that are going to hit that kind of representation for you because humans need to be creative. Humans need creative expression. Sing badly, draw badly, write badly, do creative things. Do them bad. They're worth doing bad. You don't have to share them with others. It's very fun to do so. But creating itself is a process that I think is valuable. And creating things that represent your feelings, your emotions, your identity, the ways in which you look at the world, doing that is so fulfilling. And that's why I have been drawing the same buff half orc woman on Tuesdays the last few weeks because I have this idea of this woman in my head who is attracted to multiple genders and doesn't really care about gender herself, and I'm trying to like visualize what she would be and how she would hold herself for I play a lot of role-playing games, so for role-playing purposes, because I do play her in a D&D campaign, but that I stream it so people can watch the process, but that drawing's not for anybody else but me. I'm glad if people like it, but ultimately creating things for yourself is really important. Because I don't know, everyone's got their own story, right?
Absolutely. And everybody's story is going to be different.
Yeah, I don't know. I wish there was more
That's
representation.
okay. I think this is a perfect place to end off. How do you feel?
It's been fun. I feel like
Yeah.
I've talked a lot though. I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize. That's what this is for. Folks have heard my perspective. I talk about it all the time. This podcast is to hear folks like you and everybody else's perspective. So I'm happy to kind of sit back and not be the one talking, because folks hear me talking all the time in the episodes. So
No, this is always a lot of fun. I like talking to people about different things, and especially things that are not talked about routinely enough, like sexuality that deviates from your gay and lesbian, like binary couples kind of thing.
exactly. Absolutely. So do you want to go on a raid here?
Sure.